today I'm going to bless you big time. One little short note, it's stormy Martin here in Atlanta. I'm looking out, and if we go down in power, I'll fire back up again over mobile or something like that. Just give us a minute. We'll try to come back to the channel, and you should see us live again. But that's it. Okay, so here it is. I am Michael T. Smith. This is the Church of, and here is your message for the week of May 18, 2025. We're talking about what about our funeral, the end of our lives. We're talking about how that translates into our lives now. We've covered a lot. We've been camping out on the idea of what about our story, our internal narrative about who we are, and now we've exited out or extended out to the external narrative. We said last week along our thoughts, thought E, if you will, that supernatural experiences and encounters, mystical experiences and encounters matter. It was a powerful, precious time last week. This week, we're actually diving into this, recognizing your supernatural story. So thought F, recognizing your supernatural story. Every life is a supernatural life. Every life story is a supernatural story. There's so much abundance, so much gold around us, often beneath our feet, but it remains hidden when we don't have a proper perspective or when we're not perceiving things properly. And today, as we talk about story, as we talk about narrative, I want you to pause and recognize just the miraculousness of your life. Now, you can take this from the cosmic idea of the fact that even the existence of the universe is so mathematically and such a mathematical impossibility, and yet it's here all the way down to the micro of you and I, and just the miraculous fact that you survived this or survived that accident or survived even child gestation and birth. I mean, life itself is a miracle. Existence itself is a miracle. So there is that supernatural story. But I want you now to try to tune in today and say, as we listen, okay, God, show me where you're working in my story. Show me, sometimes in hindsight, the evidence of your good hand in my life, and we're going to talk about that today. So, supernatural story, let's get into it in your notes here. When we speak of your supernatural story, I'm going to feed you good today. When we speak of your supernatural story, we're not talking about the accounting of all the seemingly inexplicable occurrences in our lives. I mean, there are certain things, that are inexplicable occurrences. Excuse me, my eye is itching a little bit here. I think of the movie Signs, right? M. Night Shyamalan, the great, brilliant storyteller of our age, one of just a handful of brilliant original storytellers who I love so much. But in the movie Signs, Joaquin Phoenix there, another brilliant artist of our time, having conversation, are you a person that can see, signs? Are you a person that can see something miraculous in the ordinary? And of course, we know that girl would have thrown up right in his mouth and it would have ruined him. So, we're looking for the supernatural, but we're not just talking about all the near misses or all the hits or all the things that are like, wow, that's kind of hard to explain, call it coincidence, call it ultra coincidence, whatever it is. We're talking about not just the accounting of those things. Well, this happened one time, and man, this happened one time, and I don't know if it was an angel or not, but man, it sure did help. I mean, we're not talking about that. We're talking about not just the good things that happen, or not just the outstanding or astounding coincidences. But when I talk about the supernatural story, I'm talking about the story of the Spirit in your lives. The story of the Spirit in your lives, the story of the Spirit journey you're having. Of course, I mean Spirit as lowercase s, like maybe our transcendent selves, our higher selves, the beyond in us, the beyond in you, the beyond around us and beyond us. But I mean your story in the Spirit. What is your story of life in the Spirit? Capital S. What is your story of your walk with God? We ended last week talking about the Hebrew Scriptures, painting a vision of this communing with God in the cool of the day, right? And now I'm talking about, what about your communion with God? And I don't mean your daily prayer, although I think that's beautiful. I don't mean your prayer as you're going. I think that's beautiful. My spiritual grandfather always used to say, he said, I rarely pray for more than a half hour at a time, but I never go more than a half hour without praying, because we're communing with God and talking with God as we go. On our way into a meeting or a phone call, Lord, give me wisdom. On our way into a restaurant, Lord, I thank you for favor. On our way, just going downstairs or upstairs or walking through the house, Lord, I thank you for peace on my children. Always in that state of constant acknowledgement and fellowship. But beyond the good things that happen, beyond the coincidences, I'm talking about your life in the Spirit, the testimony of your life, not just today and this week, but over the course of your life, where you were living aware of God and where the things in your life, you were able to trace them upstream to the workings of God. And that is the perception. That is the perceiving that I'm talking about in this supernatural story. The supernatural story is not just the things that happen, but rather in your notes, what was taking in a place in us before and after the remark-worthy things that happen. When we talk about your supernatural story in the Spirit, we're talking about what God is doing in you, churning in you, revealing in you. We're talking about what God is doing in you, churning in you, revealing in you. We're talking about what God is working in you, inspiring in you, what God is dealing with you on. The supernatural story, what God is churning in you, working in you, inspiring in you, doing in you. These things, those things that are happening into you, inside you, before, during, and after the story-worthy and remark-worthy occurrences in our lives. So we do have these things, and I'm going to talk about it today, that are just like, man, it's just a wild thing how this happened, or just a really neat thing how this happened, or, well, I was going along and they called me out of nowhere and they said they were looking for somebody and the person they originally had just fell through, and man, they just fell. And so we have these stories of these things that happen, or right when it looked like it was over, it came in at the last minute. We have these occurrences, we have these good things, the astounding things, but that's not the story of the Spirit in your life. The story of the Spirit is what was working in you before, during, after that remark-worthy event. What was working in you, churning in you, what God was shaping and fashioning in us before, during, and after that story-worthy occurrence in our lives. When I talk about life in the Spirit, when I talk about a story in the Spirit, I am not just talking about getting the job. I'm glad that you got the job. I'm glad you were underqualified. I'm glad you were the last candidate that they hired. I'm glad they were going to go with someone else, and at the last minute, the guy said, I don't know why I'm calling you. I'm just going to give you a shot. Whoa, man, that's a supernatural story. I'm grateful for that. But it's not just getting the job. It's not just meeting the love of your life. Well, what happened here? Well, we this and that and this and that, and we were friends for a while, and we never really noticed, or we had met, and years later we met again. I had a guy, precious guy, one time told me he was visiting a friend's house, walked in and saw a picture of all the pictures, family pictures, saw on the mantle a picture of this guy's wife and all her friends from so-and-so, and the guy walked in and he looked at it, he said, who's this here? He said, oh, that's my wife's from college. He said, I'm going to marry that woman. And they end up married, and now they've been married, I think, several decades. I mean, that's a remark-worthy story, right? Remarkable. That's a share-worthy story of just a spirit thing, but it's not just meeting that love. It's not just getting that job. It's not just starting that company or that new venture or that nonprofit and watching its success. It's not just that. The life in the Spirit is not just the events that seem to happen up here. It's the centering of ourselves in the Spirit adventure, right? That we're centering ourselves in an adventure of the Spirit life, and in centering ourselves in the adventure of the Spirit life, now those remarkable occurrences, they have an anchoring and a tethering to not what is happening just outside us, but what is happening inside us, right? That how the continual centering of you growing and you learning and you fashioning, being fashioned more in the higher self than the lower self, or the challenges and fears that you face. And I was really wrestling with shame, or wrestling with guilt, or wrestling with inferiority, or wrestling with inadequacy. And I was really dealing with that. And then this thing came into my life, and it was like God speaking to me, because he was dealing with me internally. God was dealing with me internally on just wrestling with my guilt or my shame or my feeling of abandonment or whatever it is. That was happening internally. internally, and then this external thing happened. A conversation on the subway, a letter from an old friend, a remark during a dinner with a server just saying something to you, picking up an article, saying, hey, there's no other way. That had to be God speaking to me. But the thing outside must find its mirror from the dealings inside. This is the supernatural story that I'm talking about. Life in the Spirit, the story of the Spirit life, how that continual process of us centering ourselves in the Spirit, centering ourselves in God, how that works in us a flow of remarkable things. I'm going to say that again, how the continual process of centering ourselves in the Spirit, centering ourselves in God, how that works in us a continual flow of remarkable things, that we seat ourselves and, okay, God, I'm not primarily concerned about a supernatural life, about the things you're doing out here, but what's in here? What am I learning? How am I growing? What am I fearing? What am I facing? When I feel down and I feel like I've made no contribution and my life has passed and I've done no significant things and I feel like I thought I would be this by now, but I see myself as only that. Watch out for that dangerous phrase. And all I am is this, or all I am is an elementary school teacher, or all I am is a truck driver, or when you say all I am, you're not only dismissing the story in your life, you're dismissing the worth of everyone else who works in the worth of the life of everyone else who works in those places. So when you're dealing with that about this is what's going on to me, and I'm just saying, God, help me with this, or I'm facing this, or I'm looking in a mirror of shame or of guilt or of inadequacy or inferiority and security, and then outside something happens where you get that letter or you get that person stops you and say, all the times I've been working here, I got to tell you, I don't know if you know, but just you saying good morning, and there was a time 5 years ago when we were on a route, and I saw there was a disabled person, and just the way you talked to them, and just the way you dealt with that angry lady, and you don't know what that did for me. That changed me as a person. And so now it's not just that Carol said something to you on your job that you didn't know you were seeing. It was the fact that you were questioning internally, God, help me with this. And then externally, something met that internal process. I hope you're hearing what I'm saying today. I'm talking about a journey in the Spirit, but it's an internal journey that is tracking and mirroring and reflecting with this external thing. And there's nobody that could have known that you were saying to God on the way into work that day, God, I just don't know. I mean, if I even made a difference, does it even matter that I'm here? If I were to disappear right now, would anybody notice? And you walk in and bam, Carol hits you up with that. And now all of a sudden, someone said, well, she just paid you a compliment. No, she didn't just pay me a compliment. Something was happening internally, and that internal united and it's like the lightning, right? It's not the lightning that comes down. It's the electricity that comes up and reaches in the air, the lightning that's coming down. So a supernatural story. Connie and I, in all our lives, and we tell this, we have several phrases and catchphrases, that we use a lot in marriage, like, shut up, stupid, or I'm tired of hearing you talk. No, I'm just kidding. We don't use those phrases. We use that with the dog. I'm kidding. One of the great phrases we have is there's nothing more beautiful than the dealings of God upon the hearts of human beings. There's nothing more beautiful than the dealings of God upon the hearts of human beings. That when you see a person and they're just being refashioned, right? They're turning themselves inside out, and right, looking at the world with fresh eyes, and you can see the grinding and the fine powder that they're being broken into, the breaking of God, the breaking of their ego, the breaking of themselves. Not necessarily by the circumstances of life, although sometimes that happens, but by the dealings of God. The light of God is making the shadows in ourselves tuck away, and you always have to be humble when you come across people who are dealing with that. Be humble when you come across people on a journey. That's an enduring truth. When somebody's moving from one place in the Spirit to another place in the Spirit, and they encounter you, and you can see those dealings and see that brokenness and see that internal shedding, that molting that's happening. They're scraping them, and you don't judge those people. Have compassion. Why? Because you yourselves will be on the journey one day from one place in the Spirit to the next. So we remark often on this idea that there are few things more beautiful than the dealings of God upon the hearts of a person, upon the hearts of humans, upon the hearts of men, those who are of not the angelic class, but of the human class. There's few things more beautiful. But another statement that Connie and I live by, and we try to order our lives by, and guide our family by and model ourselves after is this, that the real goal of life is supernatural stories. The real goal of life is to have things in your life that when somebody asks you about them, you say, oh, I got to tell you. And the tale that we're going to tell is a tale of God's doing. That we should have supernatural stories, that the questions of the simpleness of our lives should have, you should be able to take your present life and track it back upstream to something that God was doing internally, that the internal and the external have these signposts and these trail markers that we can say, oh, I'm glad you asked about that, because there's a story. And it is a story not just of remarkable occurrence, but it is a story of internal dealings. When people ask Connie and I, we were just on a podcast. Somebody asked us to, we've kind of opened our lives up now, and we're saying, okay, God, we see that, despite all the blowback from TCO and how we're vilified and all that other kind of stuff, removed and persona non grata. I don't know what the personae non gratae. I don't know what the plural of persona non grata is, but it doesn't even matter because we're not wrong. We're right, man. We got to get out of this false religion. If our Christianity is still rooted in our side's going to heaven, everybody else is going to hell, you got to break out of that. You got to get out of that. You got to unplug your mind from that. I'm not saying you got to leave your church, but you got to leave. You got to sit in that church, and when they start talking that nonsense about, we're going to heaven because Christ was killed for us, and everybody else is going to hell because they didn't believe that. You got to just sit there and nod, okay, wow, and just move on. Well, they're enriching my life, and I love my community. That's beautiful. Or I'm in there, like a brother Avery told, I'm in there, and God's using me right in the middle of that, and man, I can see how they're starting to get the big picture. Praise God. But you can no longer swallow that nonsense of this weaponized religion. But so Connie and I said, well, we're not the devils they paint us out to be. We have stuff to contribute. So we did a marriage broadcast, and of course, on every marriage broadcast that we're ever on, they said, well, how did you two meet? Whoa, that's a supernatural story. It's a supernatural story. What? That it's part of it is Shakespearean, right? The course of true love never did run smooth. But part of it is star-crossed lovers. Man, how do we get to this place to find this, that all the things work together? What was going on inside you? What was God dealing with you about? Don't say anything, just wait. What was God dealing in me with? You have to trust me. What was happening internally, and how does it happen externally? Somebody say, how did you all meet? Oh, it's a story. Somebody say, how did you all end up in Atlanta? Oh, it's a story. How did you all end up in this house? It's a story, right? Each of these has a story attached to them. Well, we were going over here, and we had this, and we were facing this, and we were dealing with this and that. We just didn't really know, and we went down to this place, and we thought that, but I don't know how to tell you. It just didn't feel green. The trees were green, but it didn't feel alive. And so we never thought we'd end up here, and we went here, and we walked in. The person was like, man, I'm looking for somebody today, and I was looking for this, and we thought, well, this might work, but then we didn't want to pull the kids away, and blah, blah, blah. And as soon as we stepped out in the front yard, the kids said, Tag, you're it, and they started playing, and Connie and I could see our little kids living there, and we're like, oh my gosh, this must be the place. There was fears internally, concerns, thoughts we had and didn't have peace, thoughts we sure would bring peace that didn't bring it, thoughts we said, that's not peace, that we actually found it. It's an internal thing and an external thing. Well, how'd you end up in this house? It's a story. It's a story. What is the story? It's a story of the things God was doing in us in positioning and preparation. God, I hope you're out there today. What is the story? Each of the things in our life, as many of the things. How'd you end up in this job? How'd you end up leaving this job? How'd you find this place? How'd you end up starting this business? It's a story. It's a story of something happening inside. It's a story of outside. Here it is in your notes. A story of the things that God was doing in positioning and preparation. In positioning and preparation. Sometimes you find yourself in a thing and you say, boy, I could have been in this thing 3 years earlier. And somebody say, why didn't you get into it earlier? Because God was doing in me things of positioning and preparation. Internal story. The things God was doing in positioning and preparation. Here's another one. The things God did within us, right? The things God did within us right at the point of breakdown, right at the point of breakthrough, right at the point of even breaking apart. It's a story of the things God did within us, not only in positioning and preparation, but sometimes it's a story of things God did within us right at the point of breakdown. Oh, we were just getting ready to collapse. It's a story of God did in us right at the point of breakthrough. Oh, man, when we didn't think we could take another step, there was a breakthrough. The things God did in us in breaking that we came out on the other side and a part of the low self had been cracked and removed away from us, and we were able to step into into a higher peace, a story of our lives, of not only the house, the job, the car, the child, the pregnancy, the rainbow pregnancy and all. It's not just that. That's just not that. That's the story of life. The supernatural story is what God was doing in preparation and positioning. The supernatural story is what was happening at the point of breakdown, breakthrough, and even breaking apart. I think today of the story in the Hebrew Scriptures, Deuteronomy 8. You can read it when you get home. Maybe you are home. You can read it after service. In the Hebrew Scriptures of Deuteronomy 8, right, like all sacred texts, there's a folly, right, in taking them as entirely factual and fundamentally true. That's not their purpose. The purpose of Genesis through Malachi or of Matthew through Revelation, the point of these things is not to take them as factually and fundamentally true. There's great folly in that. Say, I accept this as factually. That's not even their purpose. Their purpose is not to say, here is the facts and the fundamental truth of history. They have a higher purpose, which is the provocation of our thoughts and life direction into higher things. There's folly in taking them entirely factually and fundamentally true, but there's great wisdom found, right? And I have in my notes, there's great wisdom mined, M-I-N-E-D. There's great wisdom found in their consideration and contemplation. There's great folly in looking at any sacred text and say, I take this as factually and fundamentally true. That's great folly. But there's great wisdom to be found or to be mined in our contemplating and considering of the sacred text. What wisdom is found there? What wisdom is mined out of that? I'll tell you the wisdom. That what's really going on in their contemplation and in their consideration is the large things they reveal, or the largeness they reveal about the higher life, the largeness they reveal about very human things. I'll say it again. There's great folly in taking sacred text as factually and fundamentally true. There's great folly there, and you're not. And when you're in weaponized religion, and you got to be right or you go to hell, you can't even enter the door of just how deceived you are. And trust me, I know. I was there for 3 decades. You can't even appreciate how deceived you are until you step out of, my God, how deceived I was. So I lived in that great folly of taking these things as factually and fundamentally true, and I was missing out on the rich wisdom that was found in mind in contemplating and considering the sacred text, not for the purpose of discovering the factual fundamental truth, but for the sheer purpose of getting a glimpse of the largeness that can come out of them. What they reveal, the largeness they reveal about the higher things and about very human things. The Scriptures, as we think of Deuteronomy 8, I don't want you to read this as literal people in factual places and factual happenings, that God is factually killing other people on their behalf. Emphasis on the wrong syllable. You're not catching it right. We should read these Scriptures not thinking about this is the factual truth of how God kicked other people out of their home for the sake of other people that he had chosen and justified. You're reading it wrong. But if you read this as this is telling us something about the higher things that God does in the human life, that there's a largeness to be mined out of its contemplation and consideration, well, now you're on the right track. So what do the verses in Deuteronomy 8 reveal? Well, they are verses about the wilderness. Really what's happening in Deuteronomy chapter 8 is it's a threshold a recap, right? They're not on business, right? They're on sand, right? And they got all 10 toes on the edge of the promised land. They're just right there. And in the story, Moses says, skirt, it's halt right there. Let's go back over. Let's recap where we've been. And Deuteronomy 8, he starts off in verse 2. I'll just read it to you quickly. He says, you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God led thee these 40 years. So Moses is saying, we're going to look back and see where we've come from. Why? Well, we can see where we're going right here, but where we're going is insignificant, right? That's the supernatural thing that God is going to do. How did you get to this promised place? How did you get to this place of abundance? That's the supernatural thing God does outside, but the wilderness is what was happening internally during the journey. So we're at this threshold recap. Threshold recap of what? You can write it down. There's like an A, B, C, D here, or a lowercase an I, and an IV, however you want to do it. But what we move from is a place of bondage, right? That's Egypt in the Hebrew Scriptures. That's a place where we're ensnared. That's Egypt, bondage, right? And then we move into a place of deliverance. We can mark when God does something to bring us out of that. But we rarely move from a place of bondage to a place of deliverance into a place place of promise, but in fact the order is first is the place of bondage, then the second one is the place of deliverance, then is the place of wilderness, and finally, right, we have the bondage stage, we have the deliverance stage, we have the wilderness stage, and then the last one is the promised place. And my God, we'd love to move from bondage to the promised place, but there is a process, at least according to the Hebrew Scriptures. And again, like all stories, they're mirroring back to us a human truth, right? That's what we get out of the sacred text, is they're hopefully showing us a little bit of the divine mind, but they're really reflecting back to us about the complex process of being human. So we move from this place, this sphere of bondage, a sphere of deliverance, a sphere of wilderness, into a sphere of a promised place. And these, in the scriptures here, it looks like it's a one and done thing. They were in Egypt, then they got delivered at the Red Sea, then they entered the wilderness, and then they entered the promised place. But in fact, these are not one and done experiences in any human life. It's not that you and I were in bondage, we were delivered, we went through a wilderness, we got to the promised place, but they are all plural. The bondages, the deliverances, the wilderness, and the promised places, they are plural. In other words, we're going to discover multiple bondages in our lives. I heard a thing early on. They said, our lives are like a big thick rope that's tied in multiple knots. There's knots here, knots here, knots here, knots here. And God does, when we say, well, we got saved or we came to Christ or we converted, God unties this knot and we say, woo, my God, look at that. I was in bondage. There's been a deliverance. Here comes the wilderness. Here comes the promised place. We think that's it. But there are other knots in our life rope. Other places where there shall be the dealings of God upon the hearts of human beings. The dealings of God in our own lives. The bondages, the deliverances, the wildernesses, the promised places are plural. Sometimes these things are plural simply because we're repeating them. You catch this in your notes. They're plural sometimes because we are repeating them. That there's something that's supposed to work in us during this process that is not working in us, that we're not allowing to work in us. So we repeat these bondage cycles, these deliverance cycles, these wilderness cycles, trying to get to the promised place of rest, but we find ourselves back in the need for deliverance out of bondage. And these are plural because we're repeating them. I liken it to this: take another lap. And when you read the story of the Hebrew people, this maybe not factually and fundamentally true, but certainly worthy of contemplation and consideration for what it tells us about higher things and human things, right? When you read this, you'll find that the idea was it took 40 years to get to an 11-day journey. It's like we're going to walk from here. I'm in Atlanta. We're going to walk from Atlanta to Macon. It's going to take us a few days, and we're going to stop and rest. There's a lot of us here, so we're going to camp overnight. Maybe Atlanta to Valdosta, but we'll get there in about 11 days. It took them 40 years. Why? Because they were repeating. They were, okay, do you see how God delivered you? Do you see how God takes care of you? Do you see how God's got your back? Yes, we do. And then the next day, God, where's God? I can't believe we're out here. We're all going to die. And God's like, take another lap. So we're having these plural experiences sometimes because we're repeating the same learning process. So sometimes these are plural because we're repeating them. Sometimes they are plural because they're let me see if I can do this. Because we're in a cycle that can feel like the same cycle. Maybe we can do this here. So sometimes we repeat because what we should have learned in the process, right? We've got our start line here, and our friend. We're not learning the process. So we start out, and we're moving along, and we're going, 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 and we get to this place, and it's like, okay, you done? And I don't even know where God is, and God's like, okay, let's try that again. Let's go all the way back, and we'll repeat the process again. Okay, so sometimes we're repeating, but other times we're not repeating. What we actually are is, in your notes here, we are engaging in a larger, deeper work. It can seem like we're going around the same track. But in fact, with each pass, what it's working in us is bigger, larger, deeper, more profound than it was before. There are things in marriage like this. I thought we were past this. Things in parenting like this. I thought we were past this. Things in finances like this. I thought we were past this. God, I thought I had learned the how to trust you thing right back here. God says you did learn how to trust me there, but what I'm working now is for you how to trust me out here. And so I feel like I'm back at square one. Kind of you're back at square one. In actuality, it feels like square one, but you're actually operating in a much larger plane here. Back here, you were just trusting me, for the bus ride home. Now you're having to trust me to meet payroll in a way at your company that you just don't know how you're going to make that payroll. It seems like the similar lesson, but the sphere of it, the circle of it, it's the biggest and the largest. Do you understand? So here we go. So sometimes there's a repeat because it's the same lesson. Sometimes there's a repeat because there's a larger and deeper work. Sometimes there's a repeat because we're in something new. That we're actually not in the place that we were. We're actually in something entirely new. That you're over here and you say, man, I've been through this. We've been through this trial. We've had this conversation. I thought we made progress in my family, and it feels like we're back there, but you're actually not back there anymore. You've graduated from that. You've migrated over, and there's an entirely new thing. And you say, it feels familiar. Well, it does feel familiar, but you're actually at a place where it's reminding you of your need for stretching. And you say, wow, I thought I already had that. But really, this is kind of a recentering. When you get over here, you are being reminded and recentered. Not in the old lesson, but in a new dimension that kind of says, oh yeah, I got it now, God. I'm in something now that's teaching me something new, but it's teaching me something new by using and depending upon the old. Think of it as math, right? There's still multiplication involved. You're just multiplying, 2-digit, 3-digit, multiple numbers. It's still the triangle, but now we're looking at the inverse and opposite and this and that, and this is always 1 degree, 180 degrees, no matter which. Hey, you're building on the same foundation, but what? You're actually learning something new that is reminiscent of, reminding of, familiar with, but it's actually new. So it feels like a repeat, right? Multiple wildernesses, plural deliverances. Sometimes it's a repeat because we haven't learned the lessons. Other times it's a repeat because there's a larger work. Sometimes it's a repeat because it reminds us of the usefulness of the old in the new and our need for stretching. But not only is the idea here, and I don't even know if you're out there, but that's all right. Somebody told me this last week. Your brother said, stop asking if we're out here and stop rushing. We want to sit here all day. I thank you for that, Brother Hess. Wildernesses, deliverances, bondages, promised places, they not only repeat, hear this, they're also multiplex. What do you mean multiplex? Is that the movies? Well, it could be. They're also multiplex. Think of an onion, right? You got the outer ring, the inner ring. They're multiplex. What do I mean by that? That we can be in different phases of the process, in different spheres of our lives at the same dang time. That we could be in a bondage area in sphere A while we're in a deliverance area in sphere B, while we're in a wilderness area in sphere C, while we're entering into a promised place of rest in sphere D. And we can say, wow, we finally gotten that marriage breakthrough, and we've entered into this place where, man, things are really good between him and her. Things are really good there. But boy, it seems like we're really dealing with this finance thing and taking that same test again. Seems like over here, God's just really getting us to trust him regarding our church and spiritual life, because I thought we were anchored and I thought we had found a home, and now it's just like we're out in the woods again, we're out trailing again trying to find it, and then yet over here, we're just now enjoying the finally, paying off this debt or whatever. And so it's like, here I've got some bondage, here I've got some deliverance, here I've got some wilderness, and here I've got some rest. That the idea of Deuteronomy and Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they're not just a story of a singular wilderness, a single wilderness, a single deliverance, a single bondage, but they're repeat ones. They're plural because they repeat, but they're also multiplex, which means you can be in different stages. You can have table 1 just now sitting down getting their water and their chips and salsa. Table 2 got their menus, they're ordering apps. Table 3, their entrees are arriving, sizzling fajitas. And table 4, they're doing the dulce de leche, right? The tres leches and the sweaty sombrero, Feliz cumpleaños a te. And somebody say, well, it's the same restaurant. Yeah, sometimes our lives can have different parts of us in multiple spheres, and we're rejoicing because, we're finally resting, and we're also upset and struggling because we sense that we're snared. I hope you're catching what I'm saying. We can be still in bondage in one sphere, right? Awakening to the shackles. I never even realized I had a problem here. Think of the knots, right? So, whoa, God finally got rid of smoking, took the taste out of my mouth. I'm enjoying some rest there. It was a bondage and a battle and all that. And God dealt with me inside. And I really thought, well, it's not because it's a sin. It's not because it's going to get me. And it's not because of that. But it's just, I don't want anything having dominion over me. Whew, I'm enjoying rest. And you thought, that's it. But over here, you didn't realize you were angry in traffic. You didn't realize you were racist. You didn't realize you were sexist. You didn't realize you were homophobic. You didn't even realize that you were dominated by fear in your parenting. And you thought, whoa, man, when the nicotine got out of me, I thought that was, I don't cuss, I don't chew, and I don't run with those who do. Whoo, I'm free. And then God's like, now let's talk about the way you parent by fear. You're awakening to shackles you never realized were there. It's multiplex. In one area, you're awakening to shackles you didn't even realize were there, while in another area, you're tapping into deliverance. You've got a newfound lightness and freedom. You've come out of traffic and didn't cuss anybody out. When people go and they let you hear and they do that, and what do you say to them? They instead of you trying to snake your way and beat everybody, you pause and somebody waves you on and says, no, you can go ahead, brother. And you say, oh my gosh. And anytime somebody does that to me, I just extend my hand like I'm the Pope and I say, I bless you today. You're going to heaven. Not necessarily today, but you're going to heaven. Oh, thank you, ma'am. You're going to heaven. Thank you, sir. You're going to heaven. Somebody say, why would you tell them they're going to heaven? Well, because back when you're shackled in bondage, you say, you're going to hell, man. I mean, so I was sending them to hell, now I'm sending them to heaven. Not necessarily that day. So in one area, you're awakening to a shackle you didn't even know. Gosh, I didn't realize I was afraid. Didn't realize I was manipulative. Didn't even realize that I was controlling my husband, controlling my wife. Didn't even realize I was using physical intimidation. Didn't even realize I was talking to my children in a broken way because that's how I was talked to. Wow, I thought I was free, and I find out I'm in bondage. Well, listen, it's not you're either free or in bondage. It's that you're free over here, but you're wakening up to another thing that God is going to work in. In bondage, awakening to shackles. Another sphere, you're tapping into deliverance. Wow, I made it all the way through it. There was no children harmed in the making of this getting ready for church. Because how many of you know, getting ready for church, more children are screamed at, yelled at, abused, shaken, and threatened. I'll beat the cute off you on the way to the prayer service than any other time. But at the same time, in another sphere, you're capturing the deep lessons of the wilderness. You're transitioning. God's saying, look, I want you to see what's happened behind you. I want you to see where I'm taking you, and I want to work in you, to deal with you, to trust me. That's what happens in the wilderness. The wilderness is about learning to trust God. It's about looking behind to see where God was there when you were tantruming and you didn't realize God was there, and looking ahead to know that we're going to this new thing, but God is going to be there. So you're in bondage and deliverance and in the wilderness, and in some other area, you're enjoying this idea of laying hold of rest, total rest of soul. That there was a while that you didn't think you and the missus were going to make it, you and the mister were going to make it, and now you're like, we're going to do it. There was a while you didn't think you'd ever be at peace being alone. Man, I've got to have a relationship, and now you're just at peace being single. Man, I never thought. So you got some rest going on, some wilderness going on, some deliverance at hand, and some bondage that you're awakened to, because these things are not just plural, they're multiplex. I'm preaching better than you're emojiing. I don't even know what that means. So here it is. There's a common trait within all wilderness seasons, and that is this. The common trait of all wilderness seasons, which is what we're talking about today, the supernatural thing, God revealing before, during, and after the thing that God is doing. And of course, I don't mean God actively doing, that God is sitting there going, you, and you, but not you. No, I'm talking about on your journey, the things of the spirit life that are being revealed, that you're just looking and say, wow, I realize. I mean, I had this happen to me with Connie one time, where I just realized that, she thinks I'm really super incredible. And I realized that I was actually benefiting from the menagerie of scumbag guys that had come before me, right? When it was like if I just had to be 10% less of a jerk to be an angel, and I realized that, and I realized that some of the bullish ways that I carried myself in my life that she just kind of went along with, I realized that the reason she was able to accommodate that is it was far less than what Dale and everybody else had done in her life. And so he said, "What happened here? My God." Oh, I was an idiot and I didn't even realize it. Why? Because the feedback I was getting was that I was Prince Charming, but when God, the dealings of God upon the hearts of people, and I go to my wife and I said, look, I really want to apologize for that. God's been really dealing with me on that. We've been in this area in our marriage and we're going to this other area in our marriage, and I didn't realize it till we got to the wilderness, that wilderness place where what? The number one common character trait is this: constriction and tightness. There's pressure in the wilderness. This pressure, this constriction, this tightness, that there's a thing that flared up, a pressure that flared up, there's been things coming to the surface, they're bubbling to the surface, we can feel it all around us, we think, my God, am I ever going to get out of this? And really, that pressure point, that tightness point, is the threshold between what was and what's coming next, in your notes. The common trait of all wilderness seasons is constriction and tightness. Constricting, you feel it pressuring you from the outside. There's tightness. What we would say is the narrow way. And when I say narrow way, I don't mean, well, wide is the way that leads to destruction and narrow is the way that leads to life. That's all false religion. I think that's a powerful verse if you can meditate on it in the New Testament, not on a weaponized us-them way, but if you say if Christ is really showing the way, and he's like, look, if you want to get to heaven, it's a narrow way. If you want to go to hell, it's a wide way. Let me tell you about heaven and hell. The way to heaven is living your life seeing other people and not realizing that when you're helping those other people, you're helping God. Those are the people that go to heaven. The way to go to hell is to live your life all about you and to realize you were walking by God the whole time. Now, if you want to make that your Christ teaching, I'm all about that. Why? Because the fruit of that is going to be a Christ-like existence. But the other thing of you got to believe in me and not believe in the wrong God. I mean, all that privatized religion. Of course, that's where what was beautiful was co-opted by the state and the religious powers and turned into something quite satanic. It's like Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. You're not going to get to God except you go through me. We hear that as you got to believe in him and confess him. He died and buried and resurrected, and everybody doesn't do that. Well, let them go to hell because of their own stupid refusal to receive the only way you could get over God's wrath. And all that, of course, is Antichrist. Well, how do you hear? I'm the way, the truth, and the life. You can't come to God except by me. Jesus says, look at my life. All I do is go around every day healing and bringing hope to all those who are oppressed. And I'm teaching you that the only way to get to heaven is by seeing those who are hurting. I am the way, the truth, and the life. You're never going to get to God through all these circumstances, all these rites and passages and ceremonies. You can't get to God that way. The only way you can get to God is by the way that I'm showing you. And now we're dealing with the person of Christ instead of the false religion built around Christ that we've been passed. So it's but we talk about the wilderness. What we're talking about is the narrow way, the straight way, the tightened way versus the wide way. Oh, I got lots of room. My children, they both learned to drive here just north of Atlanta, and I wanted to make sure they could drive anywhere, and so we put them on the highway, and we live way up north, and we went way down south to the airport, and I don't know, Mikey, was your first time on the highway driving to the airport? It was like, Mikey, we're getting on the highway today. Here, get on 75. Where are we going? We're going to the airport. Holy cows. And I said, look, you're going to learn this. It's the same thing we've been doing on all the back roads. Here are the lines. It's like coloring. Stay inside the lines. Make sure you watch your mirrors. Don't leave your biscuits hanging in another lane. Let everybody know what you're doing. Driving is pretty simple. You got to have command and control of your vehicle. You got to know the rules. You got to assume everybody else isn't going to do the rules and govern yourself and know this is what the rules say, but what the rules say doesn't mean that's what people are going to do. Once you know that, it's all you do it on this scale. So we go to Atlanta, 16 lanes across and a highway and traffic and people zooming in that, and we get them out there. But you know what? Where we started, we didn't start out on the big roads. We started on the little roads. And around here where I live, there's these very little roads where you're not sure, and my truck and that truck get by. And I said, you got to trust that they made vehicles that will fit within inside the lines. You got to do it by faith. But my God, you get on those big roads and the big truck, and you got a little sway, and that caddy's floating down the road, that Lincoln's floating down the road. That's glorious. But what about when you say, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have got the clear coat because now it's being scraped off? I mean, that's the wilderness. It's the narrow, tight way. The wilderness is tightness and constriction. It's the narrow way. It's the tight place. It's the straight place, as the scripture would call it. The straightened, cinched down, that type of thing, right? The wilderness is the G-force, right? Feeling of the corners where you're going on a straightaway and you feel great, and then you turn like spies like us. Want some coffee? Yes, that was great. I mean, where you feel the G-force, and you're like, oh, you're feeling. Once you get on a straightaway, but you're on a straightaway, that's life. And then you hit a wilderness, whoa, and then you hit a straightaway again. That's the process, and they're plural. They're multiplex. Straightness, constriction, narrowing. The G-forces that you're feeling, right? Sometimes the G-forces just pass out right there, right? And as you come to, it's the pressure of the wilderness. The threshold, the wilderness, if I can get this here, is the threshold. Let's see if we can make sense of this. So there's the now, right? The now what? The now when, right? There's the now where. There's the now who. there's the now what, and there's the now why, right? That's where you are. But then you could say there's a then. Oh, we'll get a different color here. There's the then, or you could say next, right? There's the next when season, right? Where, that's jurisdiction. Who, that's the circle in our lives. What, that's our business and our activity. Why, that's our driving vision. So we've got the now, where, when, when, where, who, what, and why. We've got the then or the next, who, what, where, when, and why. And what is the wilderness? I'll tell you what the wilderness is. The wilderness is the tiny little threshold, right? You've got this giant room here of the now. That's not right. You got this giant room of the now that you're in. And you're entering into this giant room of the then that they're in. And usually the room of the then is larger than the room of the now. But guess what? In order for you, right, and yours to get from the now to the then, you got to go from this large room down to this little tiny space. And it's that little tiny space right here. This is the wilderness. This place of tight constriction. Pressure is the process, the journey, the threshold between. So you I was in my bedroom. I've got a big room. I stepped out of my bedroom, or that's probably not a good example, but dining room. I was in one big room. I went through the little door between the kitchen and the dining room, and I stepped into another big room. That little threshold, getting all of you, all of your ego, all of yourself from one room to the next, that's the process of the wilderness. This process requires a shedding of self. There is a crunching and a crushing as you transition from the now to the next. The wilderness is a place of shedding of self, molting, right? Crunching and crushing. It's an adjustment. It's a negotiation. Negotiation between the me of yesterday and the me of tomorrow. The wilderness is right now. The me of yesterday and the me of tomorrow, the me of right now is trying to offload one and make room for the other. Adjustment, negotiating, and navigation. All right, let me give you these keys and we'll wrap it up. So, keys for the wilderness. Keys. Somebody said, I thought we were talking about a supernatural story. I am, because when we talk about this deliverance, this bondage, deliverance, wilderness, and promised place, we talk about this cycle and loop. That is the story of the Spirit. The story of the Spirit shining light on a shackled area that you didn't realize. Bringing a deliverance. Oh my gosh, okay, something's happening. This is breaking off of me. Transferring you not directly to a promised place of rest, but to a place of internal processing that is the prelude to the external peace. That's what we're talking about in life in the Spirit, and that is the story. The story is not, we got to Atlanta, we got a new job, we started a new company, we finally had the baby, we canceled our divorce, or I overcame my divorce, or I decided to get divorced, or I got into an affair, I got out of an affair. All of those things, right? I never talked to my kid, finally talked to my kid, finally stopped talking to my kid. All of those things, what we're talking about is how the internal and the external are married together. You know what they say this, right? This is, what is a brain sucker on a mirror, right? What's this? It's a brain sucker starving, right? This is a brain sucker on a mirror, right? What I'm talking about is the supernatural story, the within and the without mirroring each other as God is at work. So here are the keys. Number one key I want you to catch in this, I hope you caught something, is this, that the first key of the wilderness is it's a look back. It's a look back at all the supernatural ways you've seen God manifested in your travels. When we talk about this supernatural story, we're talking about first a look back at all the supernatural ways you've seen God in your travels. I would say this, all the way you've seen God's good hand. If you want a supernatural story, you have to pause and look back and say, you know what, there have been places where in the middle of my chaos, In the middle of the chaotic world I inherited and the chaotic world I'm leaving behind. And man, Lord knows I walked into a trail of blood, and I certainly shed my own trail of blood. God help me in that. But I can look back in the middle of all the crap I inherited and the crap I passed on and see that despite that crap storm that I was in, I cannot deny God's good hand showing up in supernatural ways. That's what is happening in Deuteronomy 8. Look back at your shoes didn't grow old. You didn't run out of food. That water came out of a rock. Look back at the supernatural ways. Not fundamentally and factually. We're talking about, can you and I look into the story of the Hebrew scriptures and see their humanity and their journey and see our journey? That's what we're talking about here. Can you look back and say, you know what? This door opened and that door opened, and I met this person and then that, and boy, had I met this person got moved away and this person got moved in, and this happened, and boy, we thought we were going to go here, but that closed out, but another thing opened. It turned out to be much better. Can you look back and see God's good hand? The second thing is, can you consider now the good things that have been wrought in you throughout your journey, even throughout the difficult parts of your journey? Can you consider now the good things that have been wrought in you throughout your journey, even throughout the difficult parts? And how do we measure? We talked about this last week. How do we measure it? We measure it by the fruit of the Spirit. You say, well, look at the difficult parts of my journey. Yeah, it made me tough. It made me not care about anybody. It made me look out for me and number one. It made me be able to put my middle finger up to the world. Well, take another lap. Why? Because if you came out of it a source of the flow of the same bitterness in the world that caused you all of your trauma, if you came out, I mean, that's the whole thing about terrorism, right? That's the whole thing about emotional terrorism and political terrorism, everything else, that you end up becoming the monster that you despise. Look at what all the awful things they did, and they took life discriminately and they destroyed. And I'm telling you, what it wrought in me is I'm going to be a taker and destroyer of worlds. Well, then it did. Then the terrorism and the abuse did what it did, but it hasn't been mirrored with God working inside. Consider now. Step one, look back and see the supernatural hand in your story. Number two, consider now the good things that have been wrought in you. Right? I mean, that's the whole point. As you look at Deuteronomy, God says, look, I'm taking you to a place a land that flows with milk and cookies. You're going to have more steaks and more fajitas than you've ever had before. You're going to have not 3 channels and a blurry, snowy fuzzle channel. You're going to have 180 channels of HD, 4K, high def. But remember, you used to be a person that had to borrow your neighbor's cable. You used to be a person that had to stack 2 box springs together, climb up the little wood pieces on the ladder to get to your trailer to adjust the antenna and collar down to the person holding the tinfoil. What's he saying? Don't forget who you were, but as you come out of it, you don't come out of it bitter and say, oh man, look at all those poor people that need help. You come out of it larger and say, my God, I've been there. I'm in a promised place of rest now. I've experienced the deliverance, but I will not forget that I was there. So you look at the compassion and the full humanity that it has worked in you, because you can see back over the good hand, and now you can see who the good thing that has come in you as a result of that journey. You're considering, still under number 2, the things you should forget and leave behind. The injury, the fear, the shame that you felt, the doubt that you felt. God, where are you? I don't know. You don't want to carry that into the promised place. So there are things you should forget and leave behind. But then there are things you should remember from that journey and carry forward. What should you carry forward? Your vulnerability and need. Man, I know what it's like to need, so I'll never look down on somebody who has need. You should look back and never forget the ways God met you in the midnight hour, right? So there's stuff we're leaving behind. We're leaving behind the injury. We're leaving behind the shame of just not having the shoes and not having this and everybody looking at me and knowing this and that, and everybody could afford and I couldn't afford, and everybody had a dad at the thing and I didn't have a dad at the thing. We're not carrying the injury forward. We're carrying the compassion, because we can see ourselves who we were in other people. So we get into that promised place of abundance where we have our kids and we have the dad and we have the whole thing. We have the shoes. We can afford the nice, and we don't get arrogant to look down on others. We remember who we were. So the things we got to forget from where we've come from, and the things we must never forget. That's the story of Deuteronomy 8. Remember where you've been. Forget not that you yourselves were strangers and strangers. God is trying to work in us. Why? Because we got 10 toes on the threshold of the promised land. You're getting ready to go to a place where you got more than you could ever imagine. But I don't want you to get there and lose sight of what you should have gathered in the in-between. And finally today, one, that we will look back at and see the supernatural hand of God. Keep looking back until you see it. 2, consider, okay, I'm a larger person on the inside than I was when I went in. And number 3, recognize the thin veil between the wilderness and the promised place, because they're really not that much different. The thin veil between the wilderness and the promised place. 3, recognize. I've got 3 minutes. Come on, track with me. Recognize the thin veil between the wilderness and the promised place. Now listen, let me say, truly the promised place is better than the wilderness. I nor God have any kumbaya intention to suggest otherwise. There's no difference between, having to wear hand-me-down shoes with no soles that were flapping out that you had to put paper towels in to keep the holes from the water coming in. There's no difference between that and new shoes. The bleep there isn't. There's a major difference between that, and I'm not trying to tell you that all that struggle is the same as the abundance. They are not the same, and I would prefer you have the abundance over anything else. But I am telling you this, that there's a very thin veil between them. Why? Because with the holes in your shoes and the brand new shoes, holes in the one pair of shoes that you had to share because your brother had to run the first heat in track and then he had to pass you the shoes over who were a little bit too big for you, and you had to run the second heat in track. Listen, I'm glad you can afford running shoes for $400 a pair, and I'm glad you got 2 pair. You got the gold pair and you wear the gold left one and the yellow right one. I'm so glad that you got that money. And it is better having shoes in your own size. I'm not trying to say that, but the internal peace is the same on both sides. Because in the wilderness, our fire-forged ability to declare, "It is well," that even in the middle of barely surviving, even in the middle of not knowing if you're going to make it out, not knowing if you're going to be put out, not knowing if you're going to make the payment, not knowing if what the results are going to come back as or whatever, and not knowing if you're going to survive, that the ability, even in the middle of the storm in the wilderness, to declare, "It is well with my soul," that ability, fire forged, is also necessary on the other side. Because the ability in the middle of the wilderness to say, "It is well. This is going on in my marriage and my family. It is well. This is going on in my extended family. It is well. This is what's going on in my job. It is well. This is what's going on in my finances. It is well. This is what's going on in my body. It is well." The ability to declare that in the days of pressure and tightness, you will need that same centering in the promised place. Because in the wilderness, you learn, like Daniel in the lion's den. Okay, is it better to be out of the lion's den than it is to be in the lion's den? Yes. But if you are in the lion's den and the mouths of the lions have been closed by the angels, you find peace. I don't know why I'm at peace here. These lions could get me any minute, but I have to declare it as well because apparently God has his hand over the lions' mouths. Is it better to be up there? Much better to be up there. But let me tell you, when you get up there and you decide life is better because there's no lions, you're now putting more emphasis on the situation than you are on the fact that God was with you. The Hebrew boys in the fire could not touch their clothes. Is it better to be out of the fire than in the fire? It is. But the God who we needed to protect us in the fire is the same God that we need, the God that we needed to wake us up and get us going every day when we were in the wilderness and make a way for us. We don't cease to need that God just because we got money now coming in. God, you got to stretch my gas. I remember praying that, Lord, stretch my gas. I don't know if you, Lord, stretch my gas. God, just keep the lights on. Moving one light bulb to the place. And you're coming home and you want to click the lights on or click that garage door button. Oh, Lord Jesus, you're like a Belfast parking ballet. I'm about to click this and I don't know when you click it and it's like, it's not working. Oh, God, it's not working. Please tell me they didn't come shop. Okay, cool. I was just too far. Whoo, and you feel that release. Well, you say, God, I got to trust you. Even if my power gets shut off, I got to trust you. Listen to me. When you got plenty of power and you prepaid the utility bill for 9 months because you hate writing the checkout and you got all this peace, know this, it's not God, we don't need you now over here. The same way you needed God moment to moment in the wilderness is the same way you need God moment to moment in the promised place. Why? Because there's actually a very thin veil between the two. God says, the place I'm taking you has none of the challenges that you've been in before, but you're certain to find yourself back in a state of no peace if you forget what you learned along the way. This is not a statement of punishment. If you don't remember the lessons, I'll put you back. This is a factual observation on the human experience that when we have no choice but to trust God, we do. But it's only when the illusion of prosperity deceives us into thinking we have more power than we actually have. It's only at that place that we realize we've lost the lessons of the wilderness. And we have to do what? When we get to that place where our peace is gone, where the internal tracking of God is losing connection to the external blessing of God, what do we have to do? We find ourselves in a place of bondage. God, I need you here. We find ourselves in a place of at the feet, at the threshold, at a point of deliverance. Okay, God, I'm not even in the situation I came out of. Why can't I deal with the fear? Why am I still eating like there's not going to be any tomorrow? Why am I still saving like there will never be again? Why am I still having my thumb down on my children the way, God, help me. I don't have the fatherless home. I don't have the broken home. I don't have the trauma in marriage. I don't have the adulteries. I don't have the affairs. I don't have the alcoholism. Why can't I find peace? Because here you are in a promised place in one dimension of your life. And yet God is shining a light on a bondage, seeking to bring about a deliverance, wanting to forge in you a revelation as he seeks to bring us through a threshold of tightness into a new, larger place in our home life, in our work life, in our family life, in our own personal life. Rinse and repeat. So when somebody says, how did this happen? Tell us about this. Tell us about your marriage. See, you have a great relationship with your son, with your daughter. Well, you guys just get along so well. You really vacation together? How did that happen? Oh, I have a story of God doing in that mirrors the story of God doing out. This is that supernatural life. Got to stop, got to quit, got to wrap it up here. If this church is a blessing to you, if Connie and I and these messages are a blessing to you, if you say, whew, that blessed me, I ask you, consider being a blessing to us. If we bless you a little, consider blessing us a little. If we bless you in massive ways, consider blessing us in massive ways. We are here not ashamed, not afraid, not condemned. We are here telling the truth. We are here recovering ourselves from weaponized religion and trying to recover you, your mama, and your daddy, and your cousin, and everybody else from that same power, your children from that power and clutches, that dimming, dulling life clutches of false weaponized religion, where you're in the one life that we have on this life, headed to that next place, only to get there to find out it was stolen from you because of a political religio falsehood. We're recovering from that. And if we are blessing you in that, and if we are blessing you and yours in that, please consider being a blessing to us. I think it is fitting. Thank you for that. More importantly, beyond all of that, don't put your false religion in this here. Don't waste any more time trying to be right, be on the right side. If you got to practice something, go out and practice love. If you're trying to find community, go out and find community among the suffering. Build community. I bet there's community at your kids' school, at your grandkids' school. There's community at the library. There's community at the children's hospital. There's community down at the nightclub. There's community down at the film club. There's community down at the skate park. Man, there is community to be built everywhere. Yeah, but I got to tell them to repent or God's going to get them. That's false religion. How about just going about Jesus? Everywhere he went, people said, my God, who is this man? It was only the religio-political power structure who had something to protect that had a problem. But anybody that came across him, anybody that encountered him said, we don't know what all the Pharisees and all the leaders and the Sadducees are saying. But we know he's a good person. We know he's a good man. We know that there's love coming out of this vessel. And that's what true religion is. It's all the religion you need, and it's all the religion this world needs right now. Thank you. God bless you. I speak peace, health, protection, preservation, a work within and a work without, a supernatural story unfolding in your life. It's already there. God, I pray you give them eyes to see your good hand, not now, not then, but in the now, the then, and the next. I speak blessing on them. I release love and light on them. Connie and I pour our love into them. We can't hug them here, but God, we release and infuse them with just compassion. The sight of them, the seeing of them. We want to embody love first in their lives. Your blessing be upon them. I declare it. In Jesus' name. Hey, a breakthrough week, something internal, something external. We're looking forward to your supernatural stories, and we'll be picking up here. We're going to shift gears here. We're coming to the end, only 2 more parts of What About Your Funeral, so it as well. I'm going to go celebrate. My daughter graduated last Friday. Woo-hoo. My son graduated yesterday. Woo-hoo. We're going to celebrate in spite of, because God is goodness, and today is good. and I love you all. All right, gotta go. I got chicken wings to eat.